Hello. So, when I was 12 years old, I was in a local theater production of The Wizard of Oz, and this is what I looked like. Now, at a staggering 4 foot 9 inches tall, I had on these giant farmer's overalls and a face full of stage makeup and red swirls on my cheeks. I was unequivocally the hottest thing in the 5th grade. But being in this play gave me my first hard hit of reality. You see, theater was something I got thrown into around the 2nd grade, alongside baseball and basketball and swim team, and it was this outlet that I never knew I needed, but I absolutely loved it. But like I said, it gave me my first hard hit of reality. You see, one Sunday afternoon when we were doing our show, a bunch of boys from my school were dragged to an afternoon performance, probably by their mothers, and they sat distinctly in the 3rd row. And I distinctly remember going on stage for my big dance and hearing this mocking laughter coming from the 3rd row. And instantly, I knew who was laughing, and I knew that they were laughing at me. So I finished my little dance, and I walked off stage, and I found a corner of the dressing room, and I began to tear up. You see, the pieces were all coming together for me now. So these boys would catch me on the blacktop of our school and just say awful things. They would call me a sissy or a girl, and they would ask me things like, "Why do you do that? Real boys don't do that. Why do you do that?" So like I said, the pieces were coming together for me. I realized that because I didn't do what other boys my age did, I was going to be teased and ridiculed because of it. This was going to be the first of numerous instances in my life that would define who I was going to be and what challenges I was going to face. So now, here we are a decade later, and I'm in my 3rd year of college, and I study musical theater. So as you might have guessed, I have long since gotten over not being man enough, right? But a central problem still persists that I think is unique to individuals like myself. You see, for the betterment of ourselves and others, it is imperative that we, as a society, redefine what it means to be masculine. Now, before I go any further, I want to mention one thing. It is undeniable that we are living in an era of social turmoil, right? We're living in a time where governments tear apart families at borders. We're living in a time where brave women are standing up and confronting their sexual abusers. So I'm here to tell you that I'm not here to solve all the world's problems. I'm a privileged, straight, white male. I'm not here to tell you I have all the answers. To claim so would be untrue, but what I do want to share with you over the next 10 or 12 minutes is a common problem that I think is uniquely overlooked. So it was important to me to address this problem head on. Why was it that I, from the age of 10, 11, 12, I was being ridiculed and teased every day at school, every day of my life, simply because I liked to sing and dance on a stage? It seemed silly to me because everyone else did exactly what they wanted to do, so why couldn't I do what I wanted to do? And as I grew up, I began to think about this problem more academically and more critically. In my sophomore year of college, I sat down with a big group of male-identifying theater students on my university campus, and I just shared with them my life growing up, and I talked to them about my relationships and my friendships and all of the trials and tribulations I may have faced. And then I just asked them to share with me if their lives had been at all similar. And what I found was incredibly shocking. Not only had their lives been almost entirely parallel to mine in terms of their struggles, but they too had been forced to suppress their shame in order to create a more socially acceptable portrayal of themselves. The similarities were daunting between all of us. You see, we were all called sissies. We were all called softies. We were all called fags and homos and gay. We were called gay, and we were somehow, therefore, convinced to believe that being a homosexual person was a wrong, bad thing. We were all forced to suppress the most vibrant parts of ourselves in order to create this more socially satisfying image. And at the age of 12 or 13, how could we have been expected to do anything different? Of course, young theater boys had to puff up their chests a little bit more and act a little bit tougher and care a little bit less. Because if we didn't, the social consequences were going to be daunting. So we attempted to normalize ourselves. And somehow, the world found a way to bite back at us, our attempts at normalizing ourselves, by claiming we had something known as fragile masculinity. That is where our problem takes root. But I want to take one more step back and talk about this concept of masculinity. What is it? For the most important thing to recognize about masculinity is that it's just a phenomenon. It's one form of what we call a social construction. Now, Merriam-Webster defines a social construct as, quote, an idea that has been created and accepted by people in a society. In other words, it's a consensus as mutually agreed upon by people of particular cultures. Therefore, masculinity can mean different things in different cultures. But what is unique about traditional American masculinity is this concept I call performance. You see, in order to maintain your adequate standing as a male, particularly in American society, there is a need to perform your masculinity correctly. Now, the surefire way of succeeding with this is with something known as hypermasculinity. Perhaps you have heard of it. An extreme enforcement of bravado and testosterone with the goal of no one doubting for even a moment that you are man enough. So it was shocking to me to finally realize that all my life I had been creating this performance of myself. And it hurt. But what is unique about American traditional masculinity is that it is defined as being something that is strong and rugged and oftentimes commanding and insistent and violent. But why? I mean, who decided that being a man should mean being rugged and commanding, and above all else, avoiding your emotions? Well, as I would come to find out, it wasn't too shocking to me to find examples of this trend throughout history. King David's parting words to his son Solomon in the Bible were, "Be strong and act like a man." For centuries, men have been handed down the privilege of being a commander, a breadwinner, a protector of the human race, the ones who will refuse to show emotion in the face of adversity. And as we move throughout history, we find that very little has changed. Medieval literature encouraged a form of masculinity that was brave and chivalrous and Christian, but it also perpetuated and insisted upon the notion that the common man was the protector of the common woman and that there was no other way. Fast forward a little bit. Ernest Hemingway's controversial 1940s novel, Garden of Eden. It served as a reflection of men's fears for women overthrowing them in societal control. In the 1970s, Whitney Darrow wrote a children's book called I'm Glad I'm a Boy, I'm Glad I'm a Girl, which reminded young children that boys are strong and girls are graceful, that boys have trucks and girls have dolls, among countless other examples. And a 1999 study concluded that an overwhelming majority of men in film and media were portrayed as heterosexual, dominant working types who are in some sort of struggle to regain control or power. But see, beyond just what we learn in film and media and in a religious text, we find that this construct of traditional masculinity, it is learned far before young boys are even able to digest this sort of stimulus. And it's not that hard to just think about it. Young boys are often discouraged from feeling sensitivity and vulnerability because it is a sign of weakness. And if there's one thing a man is not, it is weak. And when they make mistakes, it is commonplace for us to write off their behavior by saying, boys will be boys. And they grow up under these circumstances. And they develop physical and hormonal changes. So should it be any surprise to us that 85% of sexual violence is committed by men? Or why 95% of murder is committed by men? But still, I suppose the young boys who are growing up not fitting in, not exactly fitting the mold of what men should be, and just wanting to be socially acceptable in their manhood, I suppose they just have some incredibly fragile masculinity, don't they? These words can carry weight. You see, when we pass off a man's masculinity as fragile, we are inadvertently perpetuating the notion that vulnerability and sensitivity and emotional access hold no place in the title of manliness, when in fact, maybe those are all the things that being a man should mean. And if that's the case, maybe we should all try and have a little bit more fragile masculinity. Maybe we should all be a little bit more willing to emotionally express ourselves and to open up, because nobility and respect and faithfulness, confidence in the face of adversity, those are the things that being a man should mean. When we continue to perpetuate the notion that a man's worth is defined by how rugged and physical and commanding he is. We're not only hurting the men that fall victim to this ridiculous notion, we are hurting the men, and more importantly, the women that fall victim to those men. So, most of my life, I found myself inside of this trap, and I felt the need to prove my manhood, even from the time I was 12 years old. And yes, even today, I find examples every week in smaller and larger ways of how I need to prove my manhood. I don't think that's something that ever fully goes away. But by learning to shed off the confines of traditional masculinity, I promise you, that was the most freeing experience of my life thus far. I was lucky because I had an access to that sort of thing through theater and the arts. But I had this monumental part of my childhood. My freshman year of high school, I met these guys, and they would go on to become my best friends in the whole world. And it was like my life had changed. I mean, these were the first guys to show me not what being a man should mean, they showed me what being a man could mean. They showed me that for the first time, I realized that being a man didn't have to be black and white, that I didn't have to choose one side of myself or the other, that I could be unapologetically myself. I mean, it's going to sound silly, but these were the first guys who would play the most intense game of like soccer, football crossover with me before we all put on tap shoes and went to the school musical rehearsal. My mind was blown. And yes, it probably sounds silly, but that meant everything to me. Like I said, for the first time in my life, I felt like I didn't have to choose one side of myself or the other. And it was because of those guys that I finally got out of my little Northern California town. And I moved to Central Texas, where I became a member of one of the most rigorous and rewarding college programs in the country. So yes, I was extremely fortunate to have met those guys. But I promise you, across the country, there are thousands of young boys dancing on a stage or singing in a choir or doing something on stage, and they're being laughed at by their friends, and they're being scoffed at by their community and discouraged by their parents, and those are thousands of artistic voices that will never be heard. So that is why it has become my duty to inspire young male artists and tell them that there is no box that you have to fit into, that you can and should be unapologetically yourself. So here's the last thing I want to leave you with. Masculinity is not a term with a definition. It is a term that comes with a decision. We have to learn how to express ourselves through our truthful convictions, our emotions. Otherwise, we're going to end up hurting those that we love. So fathers, you might be masculine because you read to your kids and you teach them to tie their shoes and you instill in them your family values, but you don't tell them to man up when they cry. You listen to them, you understand them, and you tell them that it's okay that they feel a certain way, that they're valid. You tell them that you love them, and you teach them that no means no. Husbands, you might be masculine because you listen to your spouse, and when there's an argument, you don't deepen the divide, you don't create more wounds, but you understand that your partner has emotions just as real and as valid as yours and are worthy of being understood. And I'm talking to grandfathers and teachers and preachers, whoever you are, as a man, you have incredible privilege. You have opportunity to choose what makes you a man, what makes you masculine. So why would you waste that? I'm so proud to be a man. And I'm proud to say that I'm masculine because I do care, and I do cry, and I sing, and I dance, and I do all of this, and I apologize, and I am masculine because I forgive people, and I listen to people, and I make mistakes, and I get down, and then I get up the next morning, and I start over. I am masculine because I am an artist. Why are you? Thank you.